Europe builds, and it builds well.
We have the founders and the stories to prove it.
I'm Mathilda Nathan, founder of Born.
And I'm Niko Efstathiou, journalist and author.
And together, we'll be co-hosting some of Europe's greatest founders.
Join us as we unfold their stories with candor and detail. Welcome to another episode of Europe Builds. There's few things and areas that are as European as micromobility. In so many European cities, you have people choosing e-scooters and e-bikes for their transportation. So we're particularly happy that we have with us today one of the pioneers in that field, Maxim Romain, co-founder of Dott. Dott is a European micromobility company offering e-scooters and e-bikes across multiple cities. We're very happy to have you with us at Europe Builds. We always start with the typical elevator pitch. So assume that you and I were in an e-bike in a nice, picturesque European city, and we had, say, a 3-minute ride to our destination. And I ask you, so what is it exactly that you have built? How would you summarize what Dott has built so far?
I think we have built a way of transport within cities that first is green. It doesn't emit any carbon emissions. It doesn't generate any noise. It takes relatively little space. It's also a very convenient and fast way to move in the cities. Most of the cities today are quite congested with traffic jams. And so, using small vehicles to go through the city is actually, in most cases, the fastest way to get somewhere. And it's also a very enjoyable and I would say human way to move in a city. You're outside, sometimes it rains, sometimes it's sunny. You see people around you. You can easily stop if you see something you like. And so, overall, what we offer is a mode of transport that is green, that is fast to move and efficient to move in a city, but also very human based, I would say. And that's what we are building, the service we are offering in the cities where we operate.
Amazing.
And if we could get a bit of a summary in you and what you have done before you found this, like what would you tell us a few things about the journey and what led you to becoming Dott's co-founder?
Well, I started my career for working for a sports retailer, Decathlon, so nothing to do with shared micromobility. I worked in Asia, manufacturing operations. Then joined a startup which was called Wayfair, which is an online retail for home goods. Very initial stage, actually. We're only 10 in Europe when I joined and built all the operations in Europe. But after 6 or 7 years, the company was quite successful. We IPO'd it in New York. I thought, well, it's a great story. We scaled it up, but actually, I don't really care about selling furniture online. And so I decided to leave and then started to look, okay, what do I do next? I had not had a car, I think, for the last 15 years. So I was always using bicycles or walking in the cities where I was living. And so I was always interested by the topic of how do we get more people to use bikes or small vehicles in cities, because for me, at least, it's so much more enjoyable, I would say. And so at the time, that was about now 6 or 7 years ago, in China, there was a small invention, which was to say, okay, what about we connect some locks, install some locks that are connected on bikes so that anyone that has a smartphone can just with their smartphone unlock a bike on the street and use it. I thought it was great because anyone who has a smartphone suddenly could use bikes on the street without having to buy it or having the responsibility for it. And so at the time, I joined a startup which was called Ofo, which was a bike sharing company. So that was about 7 years ago, and to lead and develop their business in Europe. And I saw very quickly that this bike sharing company actually was a big mess. And so I only stayed 4 or 5 months, but I learned everything that I guess you should not do. So it was great school. And taking these learnings with a number of people, we said, okay, it's not going to work with this company. We are not going to create the revolution in the European cities, getting a lot of people to use bikes with this company. What about we do it ourselves and we create a European player which takes a very responsible approach from an environmental standpoint, from a social standpoint, and from a financial standpoint, collaborating very closely with cities and build this European player to really develop the shared micromobility services into European cities. And so that was about 6-7 years ago. That was really the beginning. But the most important was really this responsible and European approach that we wanted to take in that industry compared to the American players, which were a little bit more cowboy like and the Chinese also at the time. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So it is often that an operator becomes entrepreneur, but not someone that has done like a lot of operator gigs and then turns into entrepreneurship. Was it something that you've kind of always had in mind, and kind of how smooth or not was that?
I did not even really want to be an entrepreneur. Actually, I thought I had seen what it is to be an entrepreneur, being into the startup before, but not being the founder. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. The amount of pressure and stress that you have, that's not for me. I prefer to be part of scale-ups, but not be myself the founder. And it's just that, I think when we were in this startup with the, OFO, the bike sharing, the Chinese bike sharing company, suddenly we really had this very strong feeling that there is a big opportunity to develop the shared micromobility into European cities. And we saw it because when we were putting bikes on the streets, we could see immediately without any advertising that a lot of people were using these bikes. And at the same time, we could also see that this industry was creating a lot of mess into the cities. And so we felt frustrated because we could see on one side that, people want this service, but in the same time, it was creating a lot of mess and backlash. And so we were convinced that it could be something really good for cities and for people. And we said, but nobody else was really doing it well. And we said, okay, we think we can do it better. And that was really our motivation to get started. And so there was no real thinking. Suddenly I had people around me. I had Henry, who is my co-founder. And I think we took the decision just in a matter of days. And we said, okay, let's do it. And then we started. And just I think 3-4 months later, we raised 20 million. We started to buy vehicles, and it went very fast after. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if I wanted to kind of get to know Maxim a tiny bit better, I've heard you've attempted to write a book. I would love to know what was your objective, and like where are you up to now with this book?
It has really nothing to do with the business. When I stopped my first company, which was called Wayfair, I had this ambition to take a 1-year break, and this 1-year break to write a fiction, which was always a dream I had, which was to write a book. And so I started this fiction, which took place in my hometown, was about a worker working on the port. It takes place in the 70s. And I really built it as almost like painting. So it goes from one painting to the other with different scenes, and it progresses. But unfortunately, I did not finish it. So I plan when I take the next break to finish it. Yeah.
Would you continue on the same topic, or the changed Maxim after the entrepreneurship journey would actually change into a different type of topic?
The thing is, I think I've changed, right? So in 7 years, I won't be the same anymore. So I think the main persona that I incarnate in this fiction will have changed. So I have to think about how to manage this transition. Yeah.
Well, one thing I'll say is that if there's one similarity between being an author and being a founder, you need to be obsessive in both cases. You really need to really obsess about the idea and deep dive. So yeah, I think you can take some learnings from what you have done and apply them to your writing.
I think you have to be curious, right? Like an entrepreneur. So you have to learn about what you are interested in. And then you just have to start, which is the other thing, right? And then write 1 page, 2 page, 3 page. And I think in a way, entrepreneurship is a bit like that, because for sure, you will not have figured out actually how to succeed. And also, if you would know how difficult it is, you would probably never start. So I think you have to be a little bit maybe even a little bit stupid, and because you don't realize how hard it's going to be. And so you just start one thing. So in entrepreneurship, you would maybe incorporate, then you open a bank account, then maybe you recruit someone and you step by step, but without overthinking basically all the steps that it will take to build a company. But then suddenly 2, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years later, you look back and suddenly you say, oh shit, actually we have done a lot. I think with a book, it's a bit like that. You turn back and oh, I've written a whole book now. It happened.
I would love, Maxime, to hear a bit about the acquisition story of Dott and Tier. And like in Europe, we don't have that many acquisition stories to kind of look at, let alone kind of the smaller player acquiring the bigger player. So kind of, can you walk us a bit through your
Sure.
acquisition story?
The way we developed Dott was actually fairly conservative compared to other operators, which were really blitzscaling and growing as fast as possible. And we knew that this business is very capital intensive. And also you can lose a lot of money very quickly. And so we decided to take a much more conservative approach into how we grow. And so we decided at the beginning to go actually fairly slowly. So we started in 1 city, then 2 cities, 3 cities, and really make sure that the operational model is right for the users, for the cities, in terms of profitability before we started to scale. But the problem we got was in between, we got the COVID, which was very impactful for our business. Suddenly we lost, 80% of our revenues overnight. And so this slowed down basically our growth at the time where we were trying to scale. And so anyway, a few years later, what we realized is that we had a very good operating model. We were generating product-wise a very good user experience. But the problem is we could not, we were still at a scale which was a little bit small compared to some of our bigger competitors, which meant that it made it difficult to invest sufficiently into R&D while being profitable at the scale where we were and compete. And so we thought, okay, we really need to find a way to be bigger and to scale. And at the time, so that was around 2023, it was much harder also to raise new capital because the money was just much more expensive. And so we thought, okay, the only way to really scale is through M&A. So we need to find a company that we can acquire, that we can merge with. And so we started to look actually at smaller players. But we could not really.
And you did that by yourself?
We did it by ourselves. So we had it internally.
Sorry to interrupt.
We didn't recruit a bank or somebody to do it. And so we started to look at different companies, and we had different, detailed conversations, including one in the US. But every time something was not working, in M&A, you have to be patient. It's, to make sure everything works for a deal. It actually takes a lot of efforts and things to work right. And so that was our thinking, was really to get a smaller player that would maybe add 30%, 40% to our revenues, and so that we can scale a little bit. And then we had an opportunity which was Tier, which was one of our competitors, which was 2 to 3 times bigger than us. And what happened is that they were a little bit in financial trouble, so they were losing a lot of money, and their overhead were, quite big. They had a very big geographical footprint, but they were just losing a lot of money. And so when we started to discuss, what we realized is actually that the product basically needs were pretty much the same as what we were doing. So we could very easily actually transfer their fleet, their users, to our own platform, which was costing a lot less money basically to operate, and basically offer the same service to the cities and to the users. And so the thinking was really, okay, if we merge and then we transfer all their users, all their fleet, all their cities to our own platform, which is basically takes a lot less money basically to operate and actually generate a better user experience, we could actually make the two companies, become obviously a European champion in the space of shared micromobility with the biggest geographical footprint. But on top of that, we could become a lot more profitable by, basically moving to a cheaper platform. And so that was really the rationale of the deal. It was very complicated to negotiate. There was a lot of debt restructuring involved. There was a lot of shareholders involved, a lot of banks, a lot of whatever. But after, I would say, 3-4 months of intense negotiation and talks, we managed to do the deal, and that enabled us to triple basically the amount of revenues we are generating and become really the European champion of shared micromobility.
I have a couple of follow-up questions here, like one tiny practical one and then one bigger around people. So when you said we did it internally, was it between you and Henry, your co-founder, or was it you had a dedicated person that was looking
it's a good question.
and kind of doing the analysis for you?
So Henry and myself, together with our head of legal counsel and a guy called Jacopo, who came from the banking side. He was working at JP Morgan and was basically managing our corporate finance. And so I think, more or less the four of us basically were the one involved to make the deal with Steer. And so I think the advantage was that we were all very close to the business. So I think we were really able to make decisions. But clearly what we realized is that in front of us, we had the Tier team, which had, very large corporate finance team, which had a lot of advisors also. And clearly we realized at some point that we were quite understaffed and also maybe not enough experience to do the deal. But so we suffered a lot. We had calls, during the weekends at night, sometimes at midnight. And so I think we went quite close to a burnout, to be honest. But in the end, we made the deal. And I think the good thing is we really knew, what we are doing. Obviously, we didn't do it completely alone. We had also external legal counsel to help us, especially on the contract side, and advise us. But overall, we led the deal by ourselves. Yeah.
What's interesting here is also, of course, then the rest of the operations of the business continue going, right? So when you have to really channel so much of your focus and energy into this process, how did you navigate that challenge of having to continue with your regular day-to-day?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, for sure, you get a bit distracted, so you have a little bit less focus on the business. But for us, we believe that it was so critical and fundamental for the future of Dott that we are ready basically to overinvest time on this deal and underinvest during that time on the business development itself. But luckily, we have also a great leadership team, and this leadership team, which was much less involved in the deal, was also able to continue operate and develop the business. What I think the key thing on that is that you have to keep this kind of deal discussion in a fairly small group of people, because as soon as it, I would say, leaks to the rest of the organization, then, everyone starts to get distracted because they're only thinking about the deal and not about the business itself. So what you want is keep a very small group involved, keep it super confidential, and only when the deal is real, basically, then you communicate it to the rest of the organization.
That was exactly my a follow-up question around the transparency. But in terms of kind of the first day you said, okay, we should actually go out and acquire someone, till the day that this deal closed was how lengthy of a process?
We were always a little bit on the look for opportunities. So our thinking with Henry was always that, we have to remain open for opportunities. And so we had been always talking to our competitors, and our thinking was also, we have to build good relationship with our competitors. We must make sure that they like to work with us, that, they could imagine basically working with us in any kind of configuration, so that if one day there is a possibility for a deal, at least from the soft side, I would say, they really would like to do the deal with us and not hate us for any reason. So we had been always in contact with our competitors or possible companies that we could do a deal with. But when we really started to want to make a real acquisition in a more active way, I think it took us about 1 year of looking at and have discussion before we we did an actual deal. Actually, before we went very close to do a deal with 2 other companies, and it failed before we did this deal. Yeah.
And actually, a couple more very practical questions. When did you know the price was a fair price for kind of both sides of the negotiation? Like, how did you determine the fair
Yeah, I
price?
mean, I can't go into too much details on this, but I think fundamentally you have to compare the terms of the deal and what you project in terms of business value with as part of this deal, and what if you would not do this deal. And I think once you start basically comparing what would be the value of your business or your shares, basically, if there would be no other deal compared to with the deal, that's when you can make a decision, basically, if it's a good decision or not. But obviously, there's always a point where you feel, oh, I should get better terms, but you have to compromise and in the end, see what's the best for you. So.
Okay, and then you close a deal the day after. Like, how did you kind of merge these organizations? What did it mean for the people? Like, how was that process managed? Because I guess maybe the deal itself and the negotiation took 3 months, but then the integration within like one platform, one
Yeah.
culture could be
I mean, it was
kind
a
of take a
massive
lot longer.
undertaking, and for myself, I had never done any integration, so it was completely new for me. And I think the first thing we decided with Henry is that first the integration needed to be quicker. So a lot of the merge or the integration failed because they take too much time. And so we said, okay, within 6 months, the integration has to be completed. And that's the top goal, basically, that we gave to the organization. So we have to move fast. We have to integrate. The second thing is that we didn't want to stay with 2 platforms, 2 brands, something a bit hybrid. We said, okay, if we want a company that is going to come out of the integration and be really efficient, where we can get the network effect also for the users, we have to move everything to one brand, one platform by the end of the integration. And that's hard because obviously, the 2 sides think they have the best platform and so on. So it's quite rough. We are going to say, okay, in 6 months, we are going to basically stop everything on one platform, which a lot of work have put a lot of time to build, right? The third thing is we said, okay, do we use external consultants to help us for this integration because we have never really done it, or do we do it ourselves? And we actually, our investors were telling us, you should ask for professionals to help you because it's so complicated. And we talked to them, but we thought actually, and maybe it's an entrepreneur thing, but we say, well, we are kind of used actually to make a lot of radical decisions and to move fast as entrepreneurs. So do we really need external help? And we decided actually that we would not. So we still had one guy who was an advisor who we could discuss and make sure we don't forget aspects of the integration. But overall, we decided to do it ourselves to manage. So we put basically someone senior to project manage the integration, but do it with our own people. Sometimes we recruited some external expertise, but overall we decided to do it ourselves. And then it was really every week managing the integration and the progress and getting everyone on board. The first thing we really focused was the team. So we really wanted to operate as one team as fast as possible. So within the first week, basically, we merged the 2 teams into one, so that they can really function as one team. We presented the vision, the goals, the 6 months integration, and with shared values from a culture standpoint. And so for us, almost from day one, we really wanted to work as a team. And then obviously there was the technical integration, all the rest of the integration that we need to do. But now, it's 9 months, I think, post merge. And we are 100% integrated as a company. So we are really one team, one system, one product.
One thing that's interesting to me
impressive.
about this specific example is also that you have a very abrupt scaling up of the fleet, right? So you now have to manage so many more e-bikes and e-scooters than you did before. So on top of all the rest that you were doing in these 6 months of the transition, how did you ensure that you had reliability? How did you ensure you had operational efficiency in this much larger fleet than you were used to before?
Yeah, I think the reality is we made a very conscious decision that during 6-9 months, we would really focus on, I would say, integrating the two companies and especially moving everything into one product. Maintaining, I would say, business continuity, but not investing in building new features or, or any type of improvement. And that was our message very clear to the team was your 100% focus should be on integrating the two companies as quick as possible, moving everything to one product. We don't invest any time in building anything new. So obviously it's a bit frustrating because you see your competitors, developing new features and so on, and you cannot do it. But we thought that the benefit of moving fast at the cost of developing anything else new was really much more important for us than anything else. And it was also part of how do we get as two companies to become much more profitable. So a lot of the things we did were also because of this move to one product, all the synergies that we could generate. And so in the space of 9 months, 12 months, we were also able to, I think, cut down on overhead costs by about 50%. So there were massive savings also that were associated to this move. Yeah.
And if we had a sneak peek in Maxim's journal, what would be the kind of the one thing that you wish you knew before you went through this, and one thing that you are going to do better next time if there is ever another merge?
I mean, the funny thing is actually that the integration, I was fearing the worst, and it went a lot better than whatever we thought. So that was the good news. I think if there's one thing I think I would do probably even faster or better is that I think at the beginning we tried a little bit to merge, I would say, the two cultures into one and create sort of a hybrid culture, with a hybrid leadership, I would say. And it seems nice on the paper because obviously you want to bring the two teams together. But what we realize is actually it's much easier to use the DNA of only one company. And I would say to some extent also the leadership, even if it's a little bit less consensual and a little bit harder, because in the end, the DNA, I would say, of the one single company that you put on top is just much stronger and much easier to manage. So I think we realized it a little bit later, and I think we moved to that later. But I think that would probably be the one advice is don't try to create a Frankenstein with a hybrid, team and culture too much. It's much easier actually to have the one that you chose actually to lead the company to basically become the culture of the future company.
Makes a lot of sense. And any other practical tips that you would like to share with the young founders considering a sellout, buyout, or like a merge or acquisition?
So if I have a few tips, the first one is even if right now you are not considering any deal, make sure that you always stay close to your competitors or possible companies that you might want to deal with. I think it's very important to build a relationship, I would say, proactively or upstream, because when you want to do a deal, the fact that you have built a really good relationship will really help you actually make this deal happen. The second thing is when you discuss the deal, make sure that you don't you remove your ego because there will be a lot of egos usually involved on both sides. Everyone is proud about their company. Everyone thinks that they should get the better part of the deal, but you have to really approach it in a very I would say agnostic way and step back and say, okay, is it good? Is it not good? And I think be very practical about the way you negotiate and approach the deal. And for instance, for us, in front of us, we had, I would say, fairly strong egos, and we had really to remove our egos with Henry and really think about, okay, what are we really trying to achieve with this deal? It doesn't matter basically, our egos and even to be, I would say, talk necessarily in a very respectful way. The most important is the deal that we want to do. And three, I think once you do the deal, I think the third advice I would have is what I was talking about is aim to go as quick as possible. The longer you take to integrate the companies, the more likely it is going to be a failure. And the reason is because what you want is to integrate as soon as possible so that on the back of it, you can start build again. And if you make the integration last forever, you will be in this kind of limbo situation forever and you cannot build now.
So micromobility is a very European space. Acquisition, not necessarily the most European process, right? Or you see a lot more of it in the US. So I'm wondering, how easy is it to do an acquisition in the EU compared to the US when it comes to your knowledge? How different is it to the process on the other side of the pond?
I don't think it's much more complicated in Europe than in the US. It's maybe just that in the US there's more appetite. I think what are the differences really? I think the first difference is it comes to labor. I would say labor laws, right? So usually when there is some kind of merger acquisition, there are also synergies involved, and probably once you merge the two organizations, you need to lay off some people. In our case, actually, it was pretty massive. And it's true that European labor laws make it just harder actually to do in a easy or cost efficient way compared to the US. The second thing is that in the US, when you talk about M&A, it's still usually within the US, right? So it's American companies that are merging or being acquired, sharing the same basically regulation, the same laws, the same language, etc. In Europe, when you talk about M&A, usually it's companies that are not of the same nationality. So in our case, for instance, we were a Dutch company merging with a company in Germany. So that makes it more complicated because obviously it's not the same culture. It's not the same regulation. The corporate laws are different. And so the language is different. So everything is a little bit more complicated compared to I would say two companies merging in the US. But what I would say is personally, at least I've seen actually more M&A happening in the more recent times. And I think because a lot of the scale-ups today have more difficulties to get new capital. So basically the main way for them to grow becomes not organic growth, but actually inorganic growth by doing some kind of M&A and swapping shares or, yeah.
I very much enjoyed what we discussed so far. I have one last question on my side. You've gone through the operator journey. You've gone through the entrepreneurship journey as well. Do you think that they're very different? And if so, in what ways? In the way you've approached it? Because you make it sound like you speak like a very strong operator, which you don't see that much in founders, I feel, from my experience in working in scale-ups.
Is there a difference?
So how you approach?
I think the operator side is the execution side, right? It's really about how do you execute based on some kind of vision or dream. The entrepreneur side, you need that execution skill, but on top of that, you need that vision, that dream, and to some extent being a little bit naive about the future, because otherwise you would never do it, right? If you know all the problems that you are going to face. So I think that's the difference here. The operator is the execution that you really need for entrepreneurship. But on top of that, for entrepreneurship, you add the dream and vision aspect that you stick to and you really pursue really hard. Yeah.
And you actually, do you feel like a person can have both? Because in my experience, I've seen founders being very visionary, but not as good in executing. And then you have people that normally kind of go alongside with them, which are the operators that are extremely good at executing. Do you think like a founder can actually be both?
Believe so, yeah. Why not? I think you can have big dreams,
okay,
and at the same time, really have this execution ability. But might be that it's not the case, but that's fine also. I think you can have like an entrepreneur that is the big dreamer, and next to him,
Definitely.
basically, there's the person who executes. So but I don't think they are necessarily disconnected. Yeah.
I have one last question in the realm of sort of European optimism and dreaming for beyond the borders.
Does that exist actually? Does optimism go with Europe? I like to believe so.
Well, I'm hoping you can help us create it. Yeah. So is micromobility, you think, one of the areas where a European player can take its power beyond the borders of Europe? So could Europe perhaps have a competitive advantage in micromobility and build something that can go global?
It's a really good question. I believe so, actually. I mean, originally, shared micromobility or shared bikes came actually more from China or the US. But the fact is that I think actually Europe is the most attractive market for shared micromobility. And the reason is because I think cities are much more dense in Europe. I think there's really this belief in European cities that they need to reduce cars, they need to reduce pollution. So they're investing a lot into cycling infrastructure. They are really trying to promote the development of micromobility or cycling. And that really helps actually really the development, I would say, of a very strong shared micromobility industry. And for us, I would say as a sort of European champion, I like to compare us sometimes as the Airbus of shared micromobility with, operations and headquarters in Berlin, in Paris, in Amsterdam. So I think we have we can right now our priority remains still Europe and to some extent the Middle East, because we believe that's where the biggest opportunity for growth is. But ultimately, we definitely see ourselves expanding to other markets in the US, in America, in Southeast Asia, or wherever, where I think we can definitely export the model that we have developed in Europe. Yeah.
So Maxim Romain, co-founder of Dott, thank you for taking us into this ride through the journey of Dott, from the first steps to this super fascinating merchant acquisition process. And we hope that you accelerate your efforts and move the needle to more European optimism. So thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today at
Thank you,
EUROPEBUILDS.
Mathilda and Niko.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Europe Builds, where we show that the European ecosystem is no longer an underdog story.
If you like our episode and want to hear more, follow Europe Builds on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Born's YouTube channel.